Thank you. Next, we're going to have Rachael Denhollander, who's going to give us an overview of the sections 4 and 5 on sexual abuse.
Thank you. It has been an incredible privilege to be part of the DASA group over the past 3 years. Just on a personal level, the depth of encouragement that I have received from the theological richness that these members have brought to the table has been just food for my soul. And so it has been a privilege. I had the ability to work on the sections related to sexual abuse. And as Pastor Tim noted, this report is very different from the SBC report because this report is really for you as elders and pastors. And our heart with this report, my heart with this report, is that as you are reading through these sections, you will see the incredible power that you have as overseers given by God, who will either inadvertently do incredible damage to God's children or participate in his beautiful redemptive work. There are a couple of things that we know about sexual abuse, and one of them is that it causes the longest-term psychological and physical impacts on survivors. Survivors of sexual abuse are 4 to 6 times more likely to abuse alcohol, 26 times more likely to abuse drugs, 4 to 6 times more likely to contemplate or attempt suicide. And the only group in our country that outpaces sexual assault survivors in PTSD diagnoses are combat veterans. Sexual abuse survivors are second only to combat veterans in PTSD diagnosis and symptoms. But what we also know about abuse is that the depth of the damage and the ability of a survivor to heal are definitively linked to the response they receive when they disclose their abuse. The depth of the damage and the ability to heal is definitively linked to the response they receive when they disclose their abuse. Because when you have been abused by a small number of people, that's a small number of people that are unsafe. When you have been betrayed by your community, that is everyone who is unsafe. So the position that you are in as elders and pastors is a defining factor for many survivors. And in fact, survivors often will go to religious leaders for help because of what we teach and we say we believe. There was a study done around 7 to 8 years ago that asked sexual abuse survivors a long number of questions, but one of the first questions was, who did you think was going to be most helpful when you experienced abuse? And survivors ranked pastors and church leaders at the very top of that list of who they thought would be the most helpful. Then at the end of the study, they were asked who was actually the most helpful when you disclosed. And when they asked that question, churches and pastors ranked dead last, behind the option of other. Because so often what we preach theologically, what we believe theologically, does not match our actions. And my hope as you are going through these sections is that you will begin to realize the incredible power that you have to engage in God's redemptive work. If we stop and think about how we describe God, the attributes that are given to him in Scripture, we will see themes coming out. He is just. He is holy. He is righteous. He pours out wrath on sin. He is safe. He is a refuge. Under his wings we will take shelter. He is like a tender mother who holds their child on their knee. All of these concepts that we use to describe God are the very concepts that abusers twist and manipulate and weaponize to facilitate abuse. So when a survivor has experienced that weaponization of the very concepts that they need in order to be able to relate in a healthy way to the community around them and also to God, their entire perception of reality has become twisted and distorted. The very concepts that ought to be able to bring the greatest comfort have been weaponized to facilitate the greatest harm. The vast, vast majority of sexual abuse is perpetrated by someone the survivor knows, who has had access to the victim through a relational context. Typically, the abuser has groomed the victim and the community by doing things that would normally assure us they are a good person, weaponizing spiritual language, engaging in ministry and humanitarian and ministry type contexts, doing things that we would normally look at and say, this is what a Christian ought to do. This is what a good person looks like. This is what a redeemed person looks like. Abusers weaponize those concepts. And so the survivor has come to see that the very concepts that are to be the most safe have actually become the most destructive. And healing from abuse is a reversal of those concepts. It is an undoing of what was done. So you, as the spiritual leaders and the shepherds in your congregation, have incredible power to begin redefining the truth about what was weaponized, redefining what it looks like for God to be a God of justice, redefining what it looks like for there to be true security and safety and refuge, redefining what it looks like to care about God's holiness. And when that does not happen, survivors are left with a God who is untrustworthy because he doesn't seem to care very much about something incredibly evil, because we who bear his name have indicated we don't care very much about something that is incredibly evil. And when we do that, we misrepresent an all-knowing and all-holy God. And that should be something we take incredibly seriously. Darkness and light exist in opposition to each other. And I'm sure all of you who have had the experience of walking out of a dark room into the very bright sunlight. And when you do that, the sunlight, what do? You blink, your eyes start to water. The brightness of that sun is so stark in contrast to the darkness of the room you were just in. But we don't experience that sharp contrast moving from a brightly lit room into a brightly lit room. And this is the same dynamic we see with abuse. When we dim the darkness and we act like it's not that dark at all, that something that God calls incredibly evil isn't really that evil at all, we have dimmed in contrast the utter holiness and beauty and glory of God and the incredible promise of his redemption. And my heart and my passion as you are going through this report is that you will see God's heart for the oppressed, for those who have suffered, for his sheep, his image bearers, and that you will recognize the incredible power that you have to engage in that redemptive work in a way that demonstrates God's glory and God's beauty, and is also an incredible refuge and safety to those who have suffered, and that you will be resourced well by the work that we have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.